In today's video, we're delving into the topic of inflation, focusing on the recent release of the CPI inflation report for July, which came out on Thursday morning. Let's dive into the figures. Headline inflation has risen from 3.0% to 3.2%, while core inflation, excluding volatile factors, has slightly dipped from 4.8% to 4.7%. In this video, I'll be giving you a rundown of the key points from the CPI inflation report and shedding light on the implications for interest rate expectations. Now, let's assess the current scenario. Inflation has experienced a modest uptick, moving from 3% to 3.2%. On the other hand, core inflation, which eliminates the influence of volatile elements, has shown a slight decrease, ticking down to 4.7%. This aligns with my earlier projections, as I've consistently emphasized that core inflation tends to linger in the range of 4 to 5%. You may recall seeing clips in previous videos where Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve, indicated a preference for core inflation as their primary metric. It's noteworthy that core inflation at 4.7% significantly overshoots their target inflation rate of 2%. Core inflation is calculated by excluding food and energy prices, not to downplay the importance of these factors, but rather to analyze the broader picture minus their influence. Unfortunately, the news isn't positive here. Core inflation remains at an elevated level. Now, let's delve into the specifics of the report. Energy prices have declined by 12.5% in a year-over-year comparison. Services inflation has risen by 6.1%, food inflation has climbed by 4.9%, and shelter costs have surged by 7.7%. Let's dissect these categories individually, starting with food inflation, currently standing at 4.9%. It's important to note that this represents an improvement from the previous month's 5.7%, though it remains conspicuously high. I'd like to share with you the year-over-year statistics concerning common items, and I'm curious to know if these figures resonate with your observations during grocery shopping. Here's the breakdown. Egg prices have witnessed a decline of 13.7%, milk prices are down by 3%, butter costs have decreased by 1.1%, fish prices have experienced a dip of 0.9%, coffee prices have risen by 1%, meats have seen an increase of 1.9%, and fruits and vegetables have seen a rise of 2.9%. Additionally, bread prices have surged by a substantial 9.5%. Please let me know if these trends align with your own shopping experiences. Now, moving on to the realm of energy, we find a decline of 12.5% compared to the previous year. This might sound like good news for consumers, a kind of relief. However, it's important to consider the context. Compared to last month's figures, the trend is actually moving in an unfavorable direction. Just last month, energy prices were down by 16.7%, but now we're looking at a decrease of 12.5%. This shift has likely caught your attention, especially at the gas pump, where the resurgence of gasoline prices reflects the upward trajectory of oil prices. While the decrease in energy costs has played a significant role in tempering headline inflation, this situation is expected to change, with forecasts indicating a possible deterioration in the months ahead. It's noteworthy that even amidst the decline of 12.5% in energy prices, the cost of electricity has managed to rise by 3%. Now, let's delve into the topic of shelter inflation. Presently, shelter inflation stands at 7.7%, reflecting a modest decrease from the previous month's figure of 7.8%. The pattern over the last few months has shown a series of slight improvements rather than significant ones. To provide you with some context, these numbers span from March through July, depicting a gradual but consistent decline: 8.2%, 8.1%, 8.0%, 7.8%, and now 7.7%. However, despite this downward trend, it's important to note that the current rate remains significantly above the targeted 2% mark. As previously anticipated, this aligns with the nature of shelter inflation calculation in the reports. The calculations consider existing contracts, not just prevailing market rates. Consequently, on paper, the process of shelter inflation's rise and fall appears more gradual compared to real-time market dynamics. This distinction underscores the gradual nature of its movement. Anticipating the upcoming month, the pattern for shelter inflation is likely to persist. Shifting our focus to services inflation, this category has recorded a year-over-year increase of 6.1%. While this indicates a slight dip from the prior month's figure of 6.2%, it remains significantly above the targeted 2% rate. Services inflation is of paramount importance to the Federal Reserve, especially concerning the labor market and wages. A robust labor market contributes to wage inflation, which in turn influences overall inflation trends. It's important to recognize that despite the relatively lackluster June and July reports in the past 3 years, the U.S. economy is continuing to generate new jobs and maintain a tight labor market. This context is pivotal in understanding why services inflation is still elevated at 6.1%, surpassing both headline inflation at 3.2% and the targeted 2% threshold. Let me share with you the latest probability figures regarding the upcoming events. In September, the Federal Reserve is scheduled to hold their next FOMC meeting, during which they will deliberate on whether to implement another 0.25% increase in interest rates or to maintain the rates as they are. Prior to the most recent CPI inflation report, the likelihood for the September meeting stood at an 85% chance of no interest rate hike and a 15% chance of a 0.25% rate increase. However, subsequent to the release of the July CPI inflation report, these odds have undergone a shift. The new probability now reflects a 90% chance that the Federal Reserve will opt not to raise interest rates, with a remaining 10% chance of them implementing the rate hike. This alteration in market sentiment indicates that the prevailing interest rates are deemed sufficiently high to help curb inflation and bring it within target bounds. Nevertheless, it's important to consider the time between now and the upcoming FOMC meeting, as various economic indicators will likely shape the ultimate decision. Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, has indicated that they might need to raise interest rates twice more in order to effectively tackle the issue of inflation. This would potentially elevate the Fed funds interest rate from its current 5.5% to 6%. However, the substantial time gap until the next FOMC meeting allows for additional inflation data to be reported. Both CPI and PCE inflation reports, along with the jobs report, are anticipated before any definitive decision is made. Amidst these considerations, it's crucial to bear in mind two significant factors. Firstly, the recent uptick in CPI headline inflation is a matter of concern. This situation likely poses discomfort for the Federal Reserve, especially in light of their repeated statements about avoiding a scenario reminiscent of the 1970s. This period in history was marked by high inflation, its subsequent decline, and a premature relaxation of monetary policy that led to resurgence of inflation. This experience underscores their current cautious approach to inflation management, as reflected in their vigilance toward the present CPI trajectory. Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, has cautioned against declaring premature victory over inflation. He emphasizes that the trajectory of job data might trigger a resurgence in inflation. Summers points out that wage inflation has exhibited a pattern where it was quicker for the month compared to the quarter, and quicker for the quarter compared to the year. However, it's important to note that Summers' focus remains on core inflation, as this is the metric preferred by the Federal Reserve. Considering core inflation, it currently stands at 4.7%, slightly decreasing from the previous 4.8%. This gradual decline is not a cause for celebration, as it underscores a slow process of moderation. Importantly, this core inflation figure remains significantly higher than the targeted 2%. The struggle against inflation is far from being resolved. Jay Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, asserts that inflation pressures persist and the journey to bring inflation back to the 2% target is a lengthy one. Historical data reveals that from the point of peak inflation, it typically takes around 2 years to lower inflation to the desired target. At present, we are 14 months into this endeavor, aligning with historical norms. While the Federal Reserve is nearing the end of its interest rate hikes, it's anticipated that they will maintain a pause lasting several months, putting us around the 2-year mark from peak inflation. This aligns with a standard and predictable procedure. Despite this, the economy is likely to endure challenges within a higher interest rate environment. It's increasingly evident that the Federal Reserve will not execute their anticipated pivot in 2023. The earlier media predictions of rate cuts in 2023 did not materialize, and now the outlook points to a pivot occurring in 2024. This pivot will likely involve gradual interest rate cuts in increments of 0.25%. It's essential to differentiate between the interest rate policy and quantitative easing, which involves money printing. While the future of quantitative easing in 2024 remains uncertain, staying informed about these developments is crucial. Amidst this, my commitment is to provide accurate information, free from propaganda, so that you can form your own well-informed perspective on the situation. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Until next time.